Are you wondering how you can learn more about food? Well, you're in the right place. This is the Chakula Podcast, brought to you by the Root to Food Initiative, a show that celebrates authentic Kenyan dishes and serves you hot conversations about food in Kenya from an economic, social, and political lens. Sema nasi kwenye social media at Root to Food on Instagram, at Root to Food on Twitter, and Root to Food on Facebook. And now, here's your host, Felistas Mwalia.
Hello and welcome to the Chakula Podcast. Every year, government agencies, parastatals, donors, and the private sector make money allocations to different aspects of the agriculture sector. The money allocated has a major influence on which policies are enacted, interventions are done, and what crops and food gets prioritized. Today, we are joined by a public finance practitioner who is the lead of Follow Money Kenya and also the founder of Kenya Budget Talk platform. Karibu sana Mathai.
Thank you so much for having me.
She'll be breaking down for us what these allocations are and how they shape the state of food security in the country. But before we start, probably you could just explain to us what you do.
Like you said, my name is Evelyn Mathai. I work for an organization known as Slums Information Development and Resource Centers, SIDAREC. It's a local NGO. And within that NGO, we have a governance initiative called Follow the Money. So through a partnership or a cohort training with IBP Kenya and Uraia, I got some training on budget work.
Probably you can just tell the listeners the full of
okay,
IBP.
so yes. International Budget Partnership and Uraia Trust, which are Kenyan civil society organizations who are heavily involved in civic education and budget work. So from that training, I was motivated to start a platform called KE Budget Talk because I felt the information or the learnings that I got from the program was very vital for every mwananchi. So I decided to open a Twitter page where I in turn have talks and invite sector specialists to break down certain legal frameworks or policies for the normal mwananchi to be able to understand. So we have those conversations very regularly, and I've seen the traction that it has caused is very useful and meaningful, and goes a long way in terms of educating Kenyans to enable them to make better decisions when it comes to voting for quality leaders and the engagement in public participation forums, to do it in a meaningful manner.
Quite interesting. I believe you also do something to do with people with disabilities.
Oh yes, in 2018, in partnership with Africa Population Research and Health Centers, we got into a Right to Food program, whereby we were working with communities in informal settlements to conducting public engagement on the right to food. So the first phase really went well. We engaged in various participatory methodologies, which include things like human libraries, where you invite specialists, for instance, lawyers and food security specialists to talk to the community. It's like instead of going to a library and to take a book and to read, you have these people in front of you, you just ask questions. So it's like a conversation amongst the two parties, which went a long way. We also engaged community radio on the same, amongst other activities like photo voice. So from that activity, we realized that the first phase, it was very useful for the community, and we decided to get into a second phase, still in partnership with APHRC. And this time round, our target beneficiaries changed from just anyone in the community to persons living with disabilities.
Why specifically people with
because they are a marginalized group and they are very vulnerable, especially during this time of COVID-19. When you go to the communities, you'll find that getting these palliatives is very competitive. Like, people are distributing food at 4 a.m. in the morning. So you will not expect a lame person to go at 4 a.m. in the morning to start fighting for food. So they've really been left out. The cash transfer program has not been effective in certain areas, specifically in Mukuru kwa Njenga, where I do my work. So I found it relevant to engage them and encourage them to engage in activities such as urban farming to be able to feed themselves. So what we're doing with the project is we're encouraging them to tell their stories. So they shoot their own stories, their own content relevant to their experiences with food security, considering the 4 pillars: accessibility, affordability, utilization, and sustainability. And stability, So with that, what we're trying to achieve is to sensitize persons living with disabilities all over Kenya, as well as the government and other stakeholders, to prioritize their needs, to ensure that since they're the most vulnerable people, this cash transfer scheme actually is implemented effectively and the money gets to its intended purpose or intended beneficiaries, which from the interviews that we've been able to conduct in the community, unfortunately, most of them have not received this money ever since the transfer program was initiated by the government. So there's a gap when it comes to implementation of projects. So we are trying to sensitize the government to prioritize the needs of this vulnerable group of people. Yes.
Keep up the good job. So to start us off, what is the breakdown in terms of numbers when it comes to budgetary allocations for agencies in Ministry of Agriculture, and what does that tell us about the state's food priority?
Okay, first of all, for budgets to work, we have to base it on data, and it has to be evidence-based. So the government has failed when it comes to relating budget allocations with the priorities and needs of citizens. So that's why I'm insisting that it has to be based on data. And despite the fact that Kenya has a very robust legal framework when it comes to trying to ensure that or achieving food security, for instance, it's enshrined in our Constitution, Article 43(1)(c), where it says everybody has a right to be free from hunger and to have adequate food of acceptable standards. We have alluded to SDG 2, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which says that by 2030, everybody should be free from hunger. We also have a strategic plan formulated for the sector transformation of agriculture, which is supposed to also have been achieved by 2030, which is in line with the SDGs. So you see, we have so many things that we are prioritized. We also have the Big Four agenda, which agriculture is the second most important pillar project for that whole agenda. So you see, we have identified that agriculture is a very important sector. It also contributes approximately 33% to the gross domestic product. So you see, it's very vital that we safeguard this particular sector and do whatever, put in measures to ensure that it is thriving, not only in Kenya but also for across the globe, because we also not only want to feed ourselves but we also want to generate revenue from that particular activity. So some statistics have also alluded to the fact that it's an emergency. It should be a priority when it comes to budget allocations. According to the Global Hunger Index tool that was released in 2019, it turned out that Kenya was ranked 86th out of 107 countries as it's considered to be very food insecure. So that is it's a grave concern. And then 4.5 million farming households are in Kenya. So meaning not a large amount or a significant amount of people are actually participating in farming, which is a concern. We should be able to, like I said earlier, not only feed ourselves but also collect revenue from that if it's a great contributor to the GDP. Then also the government had promised that they're going to ensure that 1 million jobs are created every year. But so far, we've only been able to achieve 350,000 within that sector. So you're seeing there's still a gap and still more. There's more can be done for people to make the sector attractive and people engage in urban farming or just farming in general. Then 7% of land in Kenya is irrigated, while the rest is reliant on the rain. On rainfall, which is very concerning because just in 2018, we experienced long period without rain, long period of drought, and then subsequently heavy rainfall, which actually affected productivity in the agricultural sector. Then the beginning of 2020, this year, just before Corona hit Kenya, we also experienced a locust invasion, which also affected productivity. So you see, all those things. Just before a pandemic, the agricultural sector had already taken a large hit when it comes to its role in the economy. So it was vital for some precautionary measures to have been taken, but unfortunately that didn't happen and Corona came and it made the situation worse. So what we're referring to as the Ministry of Agriculture is actually the Agricultural, Rural and Urban Development sector. That's the ARUD sector. Under the ARUD sector, budget allocations are done based on contribution to the GDP. So you'll notice that 80% of the allocation under the ARUD sector programs goes to crop development. You know, Kenyans, we are farmers. You know, we farm maize, wheat, and other crops for export. So budget allocation is mainly focused on that. Yet, you'll find that small-scale farmers still are not getting adequate support from the government. So as much as most of the allocation goes to crop production, there's still a leeway for that to be improved in terms of the support that I've just mentioned. The coronavirus pandemic brought about a state of emergency where the government had to intervene by providing a stimulus package to cushion Kenyans from the impact of coronavirus. So the package was 56.6 billion. And out of that, 33.3 billion went to the safety program. And within that budget, 4.4 billion went into the Hungry Safety Net program, which essentially is the cash transfer program meant for the vulnerable members of the community. That's orphans, persons living with disabilities, people in marginalized areas, pastoralists, and alike. So because agriculture is very significant sector in the economy, the sector usually receives like the second highest after health.
But was this year situation
yes.
similar?
In fact, in 2019-2020 financial year, the sector received 50.1 billion, while in 2020-2021 financial year, it went up to 60.7 billion. That's a 21% increase. So as much as it's increasing on the section of recurrent expenditure and not developmental expenditure. So you see, we're just paying salaries, servicing vehicles, and all these other overhead expenses. But it's at the expense of development, which should not be the case. We need to allocate money for infrastructure, for ensuring that tractors are serviced, and other
supporting
things.
Small-scale
farmers, and also ensuring that farmers have access to markets. Because another issue is that we are farming, but we do not have anywhere to sell our products. So most farmers are downing their tools and they're going into corporate jobs where you're guaranteed of a salary at the end of the month. Because at the end of the day, they still have to feed their families. They have to grow and develop as individuals. So for them, it becomes not a priority anymore because they're not reaping the benefits of their hard work. So the government should actually take it seriously and support urban small-scale farmers.
Evelyn, what's your take on Treasury CS Ukur Yatani's claims that agricultural sector will be one of the growth areas and a key point of recovery for the battered economy?
Okay, first and foremost, food security goes beyond good budgets. And in Kenya, like I said earlier, we have very good policies and legal frameworks that guide us and in an attempt to ensure that we safeguard the utilization of public resources. But we have issues when it comes to budget implementation. For instance, what I've just talked about earlier about the allocations and the large amounts I've been talking about, 50.6 billion and the likes, will hit the sector accounts very late, well into the year. So it doesn't give the sector enough time to be able to implement the activities. So we have a lot of stalled projects because of that. So if we were to achieve what Ukur Yatani is very committed and is very optimistic about, we should fix the issue of late disbursement of funds. That is from the National Treasury to the different ministries, departments and agencies under the ARUD sector. If that is fixed, we'll be able to implement the activities and programs that have already been set out. If at all we are also to achieve what the CS was talking about, agriculture being one of the main contributors towards the reboosting of the Kenyan economy, there's been a prevalence of over-reliance on donor funding for the sector. So, like, if COVID is anything to go by, or if it has taught us something, is that donors can pull out anytime. Like, donors now are going to address issues in their own countries. They're not really invested in what is happening here. So, the government should also look for ways to partner with local, the private sector and other local vested people who have vested interests in the agricultural sector to sort of ensure that it's a sustainable way to access revenue. Because if we depend too much on the donors, the time when they pull out will be in a major crisis.
Yeah. If there are 3 new taxes coming up in January, how will they have an impact on budgetary allocations to the agricultural sector and people's purchasing power?
Some of the taxes that were amended last year as in an attempt to cushion Kenyans from the impact of COVID-19 include the Income Tax Act, which was giving tax relief to those people who are earning below 24,000, VAT as well as personal and corporate reduced from 30% to 25%. So in the event that these taxes are reintroduced before the economy has been reboosted, of course, many Kenyans are going to bear the brunt of that act, because people's businesses have not recovered. People have actually shut down businesses and gone back to up country.
People will have also lost their jobs.
People have lost their jobs. So it's not going to be a good move to actually take that step early on. We need to first ensure that the economy is stable, to ensure that people can earn a living, get back to where they were, get their footing. In fact, last year in September, I think the government had given an allowance or a credit facility to companies in the amount of 100 billion. So in the event that people have already borrowed to finance their businesses are not thriving because people do not have disposable income, and then you reintroduce the taxes in January, they will not be able to pay back their loans.
Yeah.
And then it's like being between a rock and a hard place, because at one end we rely on taxes to collect revenues, which enable the government to carry out activities. But people are not in a position to earn a living at the moment because of the impact on the economy.
Yeah.
So we want to collect taxes, but we are not in that position because people cannot afford it. So I mean, something needs to be done. They need to extend it for a longer period of time until the economy recovers. Currently, we know the exchange rate to the dollar is at 112, one of the highest in a very long time. So we need to take into consideration that, so that we ensure that we are not really frustrating the citizens.
Yeah, talking about the introduction of taxes, 2 million Kenyans sank into poverty between April and October. That's about 400,000 people per month. What kind of budgetary plan can help those people achieve food security?
Okay, the safety net program that had been initiated by the government was a very good idea. The problem is the fact that it's not being implemented effectively. From the interviews that we've been able to conduct in the community, we realize that people are not receiving the cash transfers. So you wonder, where is this money going?
Yeah.
So the only way is to ensure that there's a proper system of even tracking. There should be a database of the beneficiaries of these funds. We need to identify who is receiving these funds, because the most vulnerable people in the community are the ones who are missing out. The people who really need the resources and are really struggling at the moment are not being, they're not benefiting from the initiative. So we need to streamline the way these resources are being distributed to ensure that it's actually being done in an equitable manner, not just reaching the communities, but the intended beneficiaries. These resources are available, but the issue is they are not being distributed in an equitable manner to ensure that the most needy are the ones who are actually benefiting from the initiative.
Evelyn, as you have mentioned, it seems that the cash transfers are really not working. And given the worsening condition of the shilling, what are the steps that the government can really take to ensure that majority of the Kenyans are able to afford food?
Okay, I think a very sustainable way to ensure that people can be able to feed themselves, not just now during the pandemic, but even beyond, would be to encourage people to practice urban farming. Because since time immemorial, we've been relying on the rural areas to be the ones to provide food and transport and supply food to the urban areas. This should change, because I've even seen people in informal settlements, in places where they have limited space, actually leveraging on the small space they have to actually grow their own food. It is possible. So the government should actually avail extension officers to both rural and urban farmers, so that we can inculcate a culture of sustaining ourselves through urban farming. Then the government can also give incentives to farmers. I saw that they're supposed to, in the finance bill for 2020, they said that they're going to strike out the allowance they had for tractors, apart from tractors that are being used to make roads. So you see, that is going to be very hard on the farmer. Instead of reducing they're increasing their costs. Technology is very vital when it comes to improving the output. When you increase the taxes for the tractors that are being used by farmers, it becomes a hindrance for them to lower their costs. Instead, it does the opposite. It raises their costs, and then this translates to the cost of food rising as well. So the government also needs to cushion farmers in an attempt to lower their costs, and subsequently
the cost of production.
From production to accessing markets and getting the food to the consumers. So we need to ensure that people can be able to afford food based on giving incentives to farmers.
As you conclude with the introduction of the new taxes, what is your projection of the financial situation for the food sector?
The revenue performance for the arid sector has been up and down since 2016 in terms of its contribution to the GDP. In 2016, it was at 31.3%. 2017, it went down to 29.7%. 2018 financial year, it went up again to 32.9%. And in 2019, it went down to 25%. So considering the kind of hit that the economy has taken, I think that it's going to further go down, meaning that also the country is not going to have enough revenue to be able to support its program and project activities. Then that will result in us borrowing more money from developmental partners and other countries. And you already know that the Senate already raised the cap to 9 trillion, which is not a good thing for Kenyans. That can only mean that taxes will also rise.
And how will that have an impact to people's ability to purchase food?
If they increase taxes as they are, but it's bound to happen next year, it's going to reduce the disposable income of Kenyans, especially those who are earning below 24%. If they're not given that tax exemption, they're going to really suffer come financial year 2021-2022. So it's very vital that these measures that we've discussed here today are implemented and treated urgently, because with budgets it's always about prioritization. There are many needs that are there, but what is the priority for the government? And if a country is not productive, if its people are not productive, if they are not eating well, they will not be productive. There's a huge correlation with that. So, and also the other fact that the sector is very instrumental in contributing revenues towards the GDP. It's important that we safeguard that. Not only for us to feed ourselves, but also to distribute to other areas, be it Pan-African or globally. According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, it's estimated that 12 million, that is approximately 25% of the total country's population, are food poor. That's a very significant number. And since time immemorial, we've been hearing of the same areas. For instance, Turkana, they're always experiencing drought. It makes you wonder, why isn't the government learning from those mishaps? Why are we not putting in measures to ensure that the same predicaments are not recurrent? So it's very important to that the government invests in that sector and also puts in measures to ensure that these things that are hindering farmers from being productive, such as changing climate change and other factors, should be mitigated beforehand, and a sustainable solution should be created.
I believe there are very many sustainable solutions. It's just that the government doesn't really support people who practice sustainable ways.
Which is that's why I'm saying that it should be prioritized. It should be the first thing that they do, since 80% of the budget is going to crop production. There's a reason for that. It means that it's a productive activity that is earning Kenya revenue. So it only makes sense that they also invest in that and invest in the farmers as well, and also in technology to ensure that people are not still picking tea in tea farms. We can get a machinery for that to make the process faster, and also to streamline when it comes to quality of the tea that is being picked. So those are the things that will cause a significant change when it comes to the outputs of the sector.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. We really appreciate your professional take on this.
Thank you so much for having me once again.
Hope next year we'll have a similar conversation after the budget allocations.
I hope so too. I'm looking for positive changes.
Sawa. Thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in. Find us on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts at Chakula Podcast. Rate, review, subscribe, share, and leave us a comment. You can also write to us on info@roottofood.org if you have any questions or any topics that we can have on the show. Until next time, bye.